We are starting in activity main.xml to create our layout. In the Design tab, we want AutoConnect turned off because we are going to add constraints manually. This is what it looks like turned on, and this is what it looks like turned off. Another thing we can do is set our default margin to 16 dp. This does two things. New views are created with this margin, so we don't have to manually add it, and we get guidelines in the parent view that help us align our views properly. Let's zoom in on the blueprint view until the Hello World text is visible inside a box. Double-clicking the Hello World text view opens attributes. The box below the width and height represents the view, and it's called the View Inspector. The View Inspector shows the UI elements, constraints, and margins, and sliders for adjusting bias. That is, the position of the element along the horizontal and vertical axis. These zigzag arrows connect the view with its parent view. These arrows represent constraints. So there are three types of constraints. Fixed constraints are represented by a straight line. We specify a specific dimension or by resizing the view in the editor. A common use of fixed constraints is for margins. Like, we can add a 100 dp margin and then a portion of the connector becomes a straight line. Wrap content is a line of chevrons. The view expands only as much as needed to fit its contents. This is what Hello World currently does. And finally, the zigzag line, which stands for match constraints. So the more constraints are of the matching kind, the more the layout can adapt to different screen sizes and orientations, which means we need fewer layouts for our app. If there are many views with many constraints, the Android system will work out how to meet all those constraints to create a layout. Let's hover with the mouse over the text view and we get a hand cursor. We can now drag the box around. The constraint lines stay attached and adapt as the box moves. Also, notice that the bias changes to match the positioning. Right-clicking on the Hello World box brings up a context menu with lots of additional options. For example, we can recenter the box horizontally in the parent. Hovering over a selected view, there are also these three buttons. The left button deletes all constraints for this view. The middle button is for baseline alignment, and we'll do that later. The wrench button is for setting design time attributes in the tools namespace so that they are only effective during design, but not when the app is running. To see what happens with flexible constraints, let's delete a single constraint, the one that attaches the Hello World view to the top of its parent. Hovering over the connection dot of the constraint, it turns red, and if we click it, it is deleted. With nothing constraining the view vertically to the top, the box drops to the bottom, meeting that constraint that attaches it to the bottom as much as possible. If you move the view back up, it turns the bottom constraint into a fixed constraint, since with the missing top constraint there is not enough information for relative positioning. Let's undo that change and the box drops back to the bottom. Let's add a new top constraint. We click and hold the circle at the top of the box and drag it to the edge of the layout. By reattaching a constraint, the box moves back towards the middle. Also, this new constraint created by us includes a 16 dp margin as we specified. Let's drag the box into the top left corner. Dotted gray guidelines appear when we get close to the edge. Let's align our view with that. Because of the top margin, we can't cross the guideline, but we could on the left. There are other guidelines that can appear, and they can be very useful. Let's change the size of this view. Hovering over a square corner, the cursor becomes a resizing handle, an angle cursor or line. Now we can drag the box until it's almost as wide as the screen. Like so. If an attributes window hasn't already appeared, double-click the box to open it. Let's change the left and right margins also to 16. This won't affect the size of the box. Because after we change the size, the box size is now in dp, that is, it's fixed and won't automatically adapt. Change the width of the box to match constraints, and its edge turns into a zigzag line, and the box expands to fulfill the margin constraint. Change the height to wrap content. Delete the bottom constraint, since we want the box sticking to the top. We also change the bias to 0. We'll work with bias later. To make the box more visible, let's style it. We've done this before. So let me get the Roboto font like before. Then we can define some dimensions. Create the dimensions.xml resource file and add the following dimensions. And then I have a style ready that we can drop into styles.xml. And now we can style the box with style whitebox. Find the style, click the dots, and find the style again. Let's change the ID of the box to box1 text. And set the text to a new resource, box1, with a value of box1. To clean up our box code, we can remove the font because it's in the style. Use the dimension margin white for the margins. If the bias is 0, we don't need to state that. This is an example of the editor adding code because we made a change. It's a good idea to clean this up when you're done. And that is our first box. Click the Device in Editor button in the toolbar to select different devices and see what the layout looks like on different device screens. And you can see how the box adapts to the screen. Let's run our app. And that is the basics of Layout Editor.